Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. I'm Rita Tritcher, Senior Business Writer and columnist with the Globe and Mail, and I am very pleased to be your host and moderator for today's event. Today, we're going to be talking about how work and the workplace have changed and will continue to change in view of digital transformation, the virtual office, and shifting mindsets through the pandemic. The last couple of years have certainly made us stop and think about what we value and what we look for in the work that we do. HR professionals and managers have had to pay even more attention to employee engagement and inclusion through this new era of remote work. At the same time, career paths and skills are changing due to digital transformation, automation, and the gig economy. So what does this all mean, and how should business leaders be responding and preparing? We have an excellent group of speakers to tackle this topic today. I would also like to recognize the support of BMO for today's event. We are very pleased to have a representative from BMO joining our panel, along with other speakers who are here independently. As we go along, we are going to have time for audience questions, so please type them in the Q&A box. I'm going to try to get to as many of them as I can toward the end of the webcast. And if you have any problems for technical support, please use the help button. So let's bring in our panelists. First, we have Karen Collins, Chief Talent Officer with BMO. Also joining us is Paula Allen, Senior Vice President and Global Leader of Research and Total Wellbeing with LifeWorks. We're also pleased to have Mohammed Chadi, Director of Global Human Resources with Dell Technologies. Last, but certainly not least, we have Jim Stanford, an economist and director for the Center of Future Work. Welcome, everyone, to today's event. I want to jump right into the discussion because we have a lot of ground to cover. Jim, I want to start with you just to set the stage and provide some of the big picture for today's discussion. What would you say are the top 2 or 3 most important changes or shifts that you are noticing relating to the nature of work?
Oh, thank you very much, Rita, and thanks for having me on this great panel. Well, of course, we all hear about digital technology and robots and artificial intelligence, so there's no doubt that technology is part of the backdrop for how jobs and careers are changing. But I tend to reject that traditional technology deterministic view of how the world is changing. I don't think technology is really in charge of it. Certainly, technology is changing how employers hire, how they supervise, how they allocate labor, and to some extent changing how workers themselves can find jobs and keep them. But I think it's actually the social changes, Rita, that are actually more important in terms of our employment relationships, how workers and employers relate to each other, how much bargaining power they bring to the table in determining, what our jobs are like, how much we get paid, what our working conditions are. And those have changed a lot. Obviously, we've had more of a shift towards working in smaller businesses, smaller workplaces. I'd say we've had a general retreat in terms of the level of labor market regulation and policy supports from governments. In a way, the labor market is more of a sort of a jungle than it used to be, and that can be have positive and negative effects. Now we've had some indication of a possible tightening of labor market conditions that might give workers a bit more bargaining power to demand something a little bit better from their employers. So I tend to emphasize the social and institutional changes more than just the robots and the AI.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, I think I could use a raise. Paula, coming to you next. You take a data lens to some of these themes, and we've all heard a lot about the Great Resignation. I've written about it. My colleagues have written about it. We're hearing that it's much more pronounced in the United States than perhaps in Canada. But what is your data showing about this trend?
Well, I think a number of things. I think many people have spoken and in a way that builds on what Jim says. There's just a different relationship and a different expectation amongst employees. There was a time where we very much separated life and work, and then, we're trying to integrate and harmonize it. And now people are making decisions with a view that the time that I spend at work is part of my life. I have an expectation for my life. I want to make sure that my well-being is supported. I want to make sure that I have a positive experience. It's not just about getting a wage and moving forward from that. And in our data, one of the most interesting things that we found is that the intent to resign definitely is high, but we didn't really find that much difference. And one thing that a lot of employers are paying attention to, which is, do I allow my people to work from home or hybrid or whatever? It almost feels like the direction in that area is becoming a norm within different industries and not really differentiating. It wasn't the biggest factor. It really didn't make any meaningful difference whether people wanted you to come back into the office or not. Again, because industries and requirements of the industries tend to be pretty much the same across different employers. The thing that made the biggest difference, a really strong, statistically significant difference, was the employee's sense of belonging. So did they feel a connection with that workplace? Did they feel that they were valued? Did they feel that they could be themselves and be supported as a result of the employment relationship? A number of these things, but that sense of belonging really was the biggest driver in terms of the intent to resign. And we saw similar findings not only in Canada, but we did the same research in the US, UK, and Australia and found the exact same thing.
Yeah, this is something that we've all really been struck by, and it comes up in everyday conversations. There was a time where people would say to themselves, "Oh, I'm just lucky to have a job." But the younger generation in particular seems, to place a lot of importance on being valued and having purpose. So that's great. This is a keen observation. Karen, I want to come to you next. The way you frame the issue of employee retention is the value proposition that we were just talking about. What would you say employers such as BMO are learning about the value proposition due to the events of the past 2 years?
Yeah, and so I really like what Paula said, and I'm going to build on a lot of what she mentioned. We've been focused at BMO on wellness, mental health, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging for years. And I would say the pandemic has really deepened our focus on that as the workplace. And I think many of us are not coming from an office, they're coming from home or some other location, as the workplace undergoes this huge transformation. And so we're leveraging what we learned during the pandemic to redefine ways of working. It's opened up new and diverse talent pools across North America. And we're way more flexible in terms of work location enabled by technology, as we're all coming to you together today. And we're also focused on our employer value proposition, which fundamentally hasn't changed. Development, inclusion, Paula said belonging, purpose, and flexibility. Those things haven't changed, but the expectations that employees have has changed a lot. And so our employer value proposition has 4 key pillars, which I think we've thought about and we've changed and evolved in the last 2 years. Build the career you aspire to have. So give our employees development programs and ways to build their skills. Feel that sense of belonging in the culture. We want you to bring your authentic self to work. Shape the future that you want to see. We know many of our employees, many of our candidates are looking for how we show up in the world beyond just the bottom line. And that's so important. Our focus on a sustainable future. And then balance, support, and flexibility, respect for work-life boundaries and how we are both people and workers at the same time. And then the last thing I would say is really the amplification on care, on the focus on mental health, on wellness, and leading with empathy. And, when we think about what we've all been through together over the past 2 years, a global pandemic, terrible events of racial injustice, and now the atrocities in the Ukraine, it's really sharpened our focus on ensuring people feel personally cared for. And we've actually added a new question in our employee survey. Do you feel personally cared for as an individual? And we believe leading with empathy is really critical to making people feel that sense of belonging that Paula mentioned. And that's probably the biggest difference in the last 2 years.
Wow, that is a very powerful question to ask the employee base. So I'm sure that people will find that to be a very helpful suggestion for their own work. Mohammed, corporate purpose was certainly important before the pandemic, but there seems to be a sharpened focus on it now. Why has it risen in priority for companies such as Dell?
First of all, just huge alignment with everything Jim, Paula, and Karen shared in terms of insight, experience, and kind of how they're foreseeing their overall strategies to adjust to the new realities, if I can say. Look, I think I want to go back to the point, the data, right? And the data doesn't lie in terms of both in the aggregate and the statistics, but also the actual voice of the employees. There are a lot of surveys, but one I can quote that is recent, that is a little bit after kind of the spike of the pandemic, is that 78% of employees look for a company to work for that has a purpose that is beyond the bottom line and the profit, right? And if given equal jobs, they would certainly in a heartbeat choose a role that makes an impact beyond the bottom line. So the resonance of making an impact beyond, again, the profit of shareholders or eventually customers and salary and all these things that I think historically we have overly emphasized is there. It's in everybody's mind and heart, and it is something that they do prioritize on a day-to-day basis. I would also kind of go into this observation about I think the cycle has become very, very short between when an issue is kind of on the surface and the speed in which the consumer decisions and the employee decisions follow, right? So whether that's social justice, whether that's general well-being, it used to take a few years. I think now we are within a few weeks, where the moment something is top of mind and kind of raises to the surface, consumer decisions follow on the spot, and certainly employee decisions, as we are seeing now with the Great Resignations, are following. So that's a bit of a long answer to your question, Rita, as to why does it matter? It matters because it matters to all our employees, it matters to our customers and our partners, and so it is just common sense. And I would say this is common business sense for us to make this a priority as well and fully embed it into our employee value proposition, which touches a little bit on what Karen also touched upon.
Okay, Jim, you mentioned, employees feeling like they have perhaps more bargaining power. So I'm wondering what you are noticing with regard to employee satisfaction. What would you say are the main drivers of satisfaction in the workplace, and what detracts from employee satisfaction?
I kind of come back to a bread and butter analysis, Rita. I think, some of these kind of broader things, do you feel cared for and that kind of thing are important. But ultimately, why do people, drag their butts out of bed on Monday morning and go off to work? It isn't because their boss really personally cares for them and feels they're part of the family. It's to earn a living. So, in terms of some of those bread and butter things, the satisfaction depends on how secure do you feel in your job. Are you working a gig and you don't know when that gig's going to end and when you're going to find another? Or do you actually have some stability that you can build a life plan around? Are you getting paid fairly relative to the compensation levels at other workplaces and relative to the productivity of our economy? We have seen, I think, generally weak wage growth in Canada in recent years, and people are dissatisfied with their compensation and how it's growing. What about other benefits, entitlements, and protections? Do you have decent healthcare and dental and extended benefits? What does your pension look like? The reality is in Canada, most workers don't have a workplace pension. It's all on the CPP and on whatever they can personally save. And, that's just fundamentally wrong. For many workers, the pension is a light at the end of the tunnel that keeps them going when their job is, challenging or even boring, to be honest. So what about strengthening our pension and benefits protections for workers? I think, some of those sort of broader psychosocial and kind of human management techniques are important. But at the end of the day, if you want your workers to be happy, you got to give them a chance to work in a stable situation to the best of their ability and be paid fairly for what they do.
And Jim, just, as a follow-up to that, I mean, obviously we see lots of headlines about inflation, cost of living is going up. So do you see the wage pressure increasing?
I think inherently workers are even more concerned about their low pay now, precisely because inflation has suddenly surged. So, we have situations where people were expecting maybe a 2% or 3% raise, depending where you're at. If you're an Ontario public servant, the government is saying you only get 1%. And then you look in the Globe and Mail business section and they say inflation is 5% and rising. So you are looking at a significant reduction in the real purchasing power of your pay. In some cases, workers, have got a union and collective bargaining that can potentially protect them. But remember, maybe a third of Canadian workers are covered by collective bargaining. In the private sector, it's more like 16%. So without strengthening their ability to negotiate with their employers and get a better deal, especially at a time of inflation, I think workers are going to say, wait a minute, I'm going backwards. I see how prices are rising. I see the price of gas. I see the price of housing. I'm working harder and smarter, but I'm getting paid less. That isn't right. And again, no matter how, kind of compassionate the language from management is that we respect you personally and we care for you personally. If at the end of the day, your living standard is going down, that's going to promote a fundamental dissatisfaction with the arrangement.
Okay, so show me the money. That's a key consideration. All right, Paula, in a similar vein, how would you say employee priorities and mindsets have shifted throughout the pandemic?
Well, tremendously. I mean, this whole pandemic has been kind of an asteroid that's landed in front of us and disrupted everything. We have the inflation that Jim mentioned. We have the Great Resignation. We also have seen a tremendous shift in how people actually think. One of the things that we measure is the mental health of the working population. We do so in a mental health index every single month, and we benchmark it against data that we were collecting for 3 years prior to the pandemics, 2017 to 19. So there's been a massive decline in people's mental health, tripling of the working population that's considered high risk. We have 8% of the working population right now that are in the category of having risky drinking behavior compared to 2% before the pandemic. And we've heard about these things in the news. We've heard about the mental health impact of the pandemic. What I'm here to say is the two things. It's the working population. Sometimes people don't sort of, take what we're hearing and say, well, this is my people. These are the people that I'm working with every day. This is me. But also, even for those people who are not in a crisis situation or in that high risk category that I had mentioned before, we've been under 2 years of strain. We've been under 2 years of uncertainty, lack of predictability. Some of our control has been shifted. We've had more risk than we're used to, and this has been building up for quite some time. We had anxiety in the beginning. We had burnout that happened. We had changes in our behavior. We became more isolated. We have had material strain, and what we're seeing is in the larger population, there's an increase in edge, like a sensitivity to stress. So you've probably heard the reports of behaviors in airplanes. If you talk to anyone who helps you with your coffee in a coffee shop and ask them what it's like in terms of the population, we're seeing anger and cynicism. Anybody in public service has seen this in a pretty significant way. And we've seen it in workplaces as well, worsening relationships, more conflicts. And I think what's important here is that we have to remember that our populations are more vulnerable. There has been a change. So everything that we were talking about before, what Karen was mentioning, that connection, meaning, feeling of recognition, all of those are really important just to balance out this extraordinary edge that we've been that we're seeing right now, as well as some pretty strong education to have people be intentional around how they manage themselves and how they manage their own relationships. So there's a number of things I think that are showing itself in the workplace, and a change in the nature of population's health is definitely one of them, and one thing to address, not just let happen.
Okay, psychological safety in the workplace. I think that's going to be a key theme for everyone to explore going forward. Karen, I'm curious always when I speak to younger employees, so I want to tap your insights a bit. What are new recruits and current employees looking for and valuing more now compared to pre-pandemic times?
Yeah, and I think also even given the broader state of the world right now. And so I think people are thinking more deeply about what they want from an employer. And we find colleagues who are really looking to work with an organization that is focused on more than just the bottom line. And so at BMO, our purpose is to boldly grow the good in business and life. We have commitments around a sustainable future, a thriving economy, and an inclusive society. And so we know culture matters. And here's maybe where my friend Jim and I might disagree ever so slightly. I'm not saying that, obviously compensation fairness matters, obviously job security matters, and those are extreme stressors for people. But really those are the base level requirements. Employees are looking for more things around culture. And so if I'm going to look to the data, a recent Barclays Human Capital survey around human capital feelings showed that 65% of 18 to 34-year-olds said that culture matters more than salary. And so I'm not in that demographic. And that was pretty shocking to me, that culture matters more than salary. 65% of that demographic said that. And so we know culture matters. We also know flexibility and well-being matters, and employees are looking for a company that recognizes that their well-being is important. And so we're an early adopter of employee assistance and wellness programs, and work closely with Paula and her colleagues at LifeWorks, and really appreciate what that provides our population. But we also want to offer more flexibility through a hybrid way of working. And so when I think about my colleagues, those folks like me who were sent home 2 years ago, when we bring those people back to the office, and fingers crossed we're going to start doing that hopefully after March break, more than 85% will transition to a hybrid model. And we know we have the tools to allow people to work productively from anywhere. So that's something that we're really looking to offer to people, and we know flexibility matters. We also, though, believe in the power of in the workplace time for culture building, for client service, for collaboration, and in particularly for early career talent. So think about somebody who graduated from university 2 years ago and maybe has been working from home in their bachelor apartment or in their parents' basement. We know that our early career talent really benefits from being in the workplace with others. And, I also think about when you think about the most exciting, rewarding, engaging moments in your career, like a big project, a client meeting, a colleague's promotion that you're celebrating. For most of us, none of those things happened alone in your home office or your apartment. They happened in the workplace with customers, with colleagues. And so we're excited to get back to that. But we also know that colleagues value, and in fact, they really expect and aren't willing to give up what they've discovered in the last couple of years. And that's the flexibility with a bit more of an ability to come and go from work in a more fluid fashion. And so not every job can do that, and we understand that. We have a lot of frontline people who go into a branch or a contact center every day, and those are people that we really tremendously value. But for folks who do have a bit more flexibility, we're trying to create new ways of working that work for our people as we gradually get back to this post-pandemic new normal. So flexibility, culture, and well-being in addition to compensation.
Okay, well, certainly we know that regulators are paying more attention now than ever before to corporate culture because they see links there between corporate culture and risk management, particularly financial risk. All right, I'm going to kind of pivot a bit and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about employee and manager burnout because that seems to be a very serious issue that a lot of companies are encountering. For all the reasons that we've already discussed, the lines between work and home have been blurred. For the past 2 years, many Canadians are juggling family care or coping with isolation. Mohammed, I want to start with you. Tell us what's keeping you up at night with regard to employee burnout and what strategies you're trying in response, and how are you looking after your employees?
Thanks, Rita. And just one small comment as to kind of Jim's and Paula and Karen's observations. I think we should kind of take a step back and look at the holistic landscape of business in general and how it changed. And I want to caveat, look, I think every industry has its own challenges and it's moving at its own pace. And I certainly want to also acknowledge that I think the challenges faced by big private companies are slightly different than the ones that are faced by medium and small businesses. We shouldn't forget the way goods and services are delivered has been fundamentally challenged for the last 2 years, right? And every good business is sitting there trying to figure out how to continue to meet that demand and exceed that demand and how to continue to deliver value in this new environment. Digital transformation being accelerated, I think, is one key component of that, where technology now is not a choice anymore. It's an absolute conduit of business. And any employer not implementing that, and clearly many have been lagging and realized that there is a shock in the system to deliver that value during the pandemic. So there's that dynamic from one end, which is I'm a business, I can no longer deliver goods and services the way I used to. What do I do? On the other end, as an employee, I certainly don't think Jim's or Karen's observations are contradictory. They are, in by all means, complementary, and they don't have to be a zero-sum game. I think every good business now is a business that recognizes and pays its employees properly and fairly, not even by choice. It's just a sound business decision, because otherwise employees will quit, and all of us know how hard that is. But also because the customer is interested in knowing that the goods they're receiving are done so properly. Let me now touch on a little bit your question there, Rita, in terms what's keeping us up at night. I don't think there are any new trends that have showed up that we haven't been dealing with for the last 2+ years. But I do think our perspective there has evolved to becoming reactive and very pandemic driven to something that is longer term and something that we can drive as a strategy overall on a multi-year basis. Well-being is absolutely top of mind. We do believe that our employees should have more options and choices in how to deliver their work, which we think gives them a little bit more discretion into the where, the when, and I would even argue the how work gets done. So, face-to-face collaboration, I think, as Karen mentioned, or do I just want to do it from home? As an employer, we are focused on creating equal opportunity and equal experience value for our employees. So there is less question about how, where, and when work is getting done, and more focus on basically the work being done and the customer getting the value they are asking for. So there is that. I also think the last 2 years have extended the relationship. Paula alluded to that a little bit, where it really isn't a work a relationship anymore. It is an overall life relationship we have with our employees, even if they're around for just 2 or 3 years. And so our care is a lot less on the titles they have, the skills they have, the job they do, and has expanded to the life they have outside of the working hours and how healthy they are. Are there any other issues we can tackle from a social perspective and overall financial standpoint? So we have programs that you can see easily are extending way beyond the job description or the job title, and I think that's something that I foresee kind of continuing on a multi-year basis. So those will be kind of the two things, which is the extending more options and choices for people to deliver their work, and how do you want to do that, but also as an employer taking ownership and extending support outside of the job title and the job description, I think are top of mind for us.
Okay, Paula, want to get your views on burnout as well. What are the chief causes, and what does this mean for employers?
Well, in terms of the causes of burnout, I think people see it as sort of overwork. Like, a lot of people see that as something that you get from that workaholism, if that term is still being used. But it's much more complex than that. I mean, when we're talking about burnout or anything that impacts our mental health and well-being, we kind of have to look a little bit about how our brain functions. And the way the brain is meant to function is it's meant to have a variety of experiences. It's meant to have fun and laughter and social connection and a change of scenery and a sense of accomplishment. I mean, these are all things that fire different parts of our brain. And when we're only focused in one area, even if we're not overworked, if we don't have that balance of experience, you can have burnout. If you're only working and doing nothing, and there's nothing to sort of balance out what your life is feeling like, you can feel completely and absolutely exhausted. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're working 24 hours a day. So I think it's important for people to sort of realize that it's not just how much you're working, but how you're living your life. And the other thing is that we've actually had the typical burnout enmeshed with just emotional exhaustion. As a result of going through the pandemic, we had a lot of anxiety at the very beginning, and many of us took on hero roles, particularly if you were in a leadership role or if you were a parent. There was a lot that had to be done. You had to get the practical things done. You had to make sure that the business was running and your employees were okay, and the kids knew how to manage what was their new experience in school, and how do you work from home and figure out a whole bunch of different things. And that triggered a lot of adrenaline. We had to get things done, and we did, and it was remarkable, but it's exhausting. We had 6 to 12 months in, we really started to see this emotional exhaustion because of the stress of what was going on, because of all of the extra adrenaline that we had to expend over a long period of time, and because of what I had mentioned before, which is our world's getting smaller. So not having the social support as much as we did before, not having the variety of experiences. So I think it's important for people, and if they're going to solve anything, to kind of understand the reasoning behind it, and that's why I'm spending a little bit of time there. And I think from an individual level, we can open up our lives as much as possible and as safely as possible. What we're also seeing is that people have gotten a lot more comfortable with smaller lives, a lot more comfortable with less social interaction. We've been having this trend towards isolation in our society even prior to the pandemic, and it does ultimately cause strain on you mentally and physically, because we need other people in order to manage stress. So I think we have to be a little bit more intentional in terms of our individual behavior, making sure that we have the variety of experiences, making sure that we have that social contact, giving support to others, and then you get support back. All of that is important. And from an employer's point of view, I think we also have to realize that the workplace is a place where experiences happen. And we have seen a bit of a worsening of workplace relationships, not always because of things being bad, but because of an absence of things that are good. So just fostering and supporting your managers and leaders and making sure that, you know, people feel connected, that relationships are supported, that we have opportunity to kind of, you know, have those shared celebrations and shared experiences that Karen mentioned. And again, you know, that all of this is not going to come back right away, but it really is important for our overall well-being and burnout, in addition to everything that you had heard about before, how you think about things, you know, how you calm yourself down. I really just want to add to another dimension that people don't often talk about.
Okay, and of course, all this lack of balance in our individual lives comes against this backdrop of, you know, people becoming very sick and dying, and there's been a lot of loss. Karen, how is your organization supporting employees and navigating issues of burnout?
Yeah, and it's and I think when Paul and I were together last time, she said you can love your job and still get burnt out, and that just really stays with me. And so, I mean, at BMO, right through this, at the beginning of the pandemic, we've been bringing in experts, including Paula and her colleagues, including physicians, including people who are mental health experts, parenting experts, to do calls like this with our employees, where people had a chance to ask questions and a chance to really hear from the experts how to handle some of the unprecedented things that were coming their way. And so as the pandemic has kind of normalized, if I can use that term, we've also really focused on creating a sense of connection for people in different ways. And so even for our colleagues who were in branches or contact centers, they were 6 feet apart through a mask. And so how can we create ways of connection for people to feel that sense of joy, that sense of belonging that many of us were missing? And so just a couple of things that I'll mention that we've done that I wanted to highlight. One is we have a platform called 10,000 Coffees, which is a virtual networking platform that it smart matches you with people who you might have something in common with, and it creates a virtual coffee chat for you. We've also used it for leaders to create office hours where people can virtually come and meet them online. We were talking to our staff and people said, you know, during the pandemic, I haven't met anybody new. I haven't added anyone to my network. My ability to learn and be curious and grow in my job has really been stifled. So our 10,000 Coffees platform has really helped people create that virtual sense of community. And that will continue. And then it also helps people who are across the globe in the US and Canada to connect with each other in different ways. So making the distance feel a lot smaller and creating that sense of connection. And then another thing that we've done on top of the pandemic and so many stresses in the world, we faced some pretty significant issues of racial injustice over the last couple of years. And that was really hard, especially when people were apart. And so we believe strongly in trying to combat racism through education. And so we've created 2 really important learning programs for our people. One is Tatumwan, which is focused on the Indigenous experience, helping people understand people from that perspective. And then the second we launched just last month called Ujima, which is focused on the Black experience in North America, and really helping people learn and educate themselves on those experiences and on how to show up as a better ally. So even if we weren't able to be physically together at celebrations, we were able to support one another remotely. And we really think that that adds not only to a feeling of connection, but engagement and a feeling of pride about the company that you work within. So if you can't be together, you can be together virtually and supporting one another online.
Okay, certainly issues of systemic discrimination add to the feeling of burnout. Jim, you have a slightly different take on the issue of burnout. What would you say are the costs of burnout to productivity and corporate performance? And are you looking at it through that lens?
Oh, certainly. I am an economist, so they say an economist is someone who's good with numbers but didn't have the personality to become an accountant. So that's why I am always bringing the numbers, the economic dollars and cents to these issues, and the dollars and cents matter a lot around workplace mental health well-being and workplace mental health injuries. So employers may feel, that it's good to try and extract a bit more productivity from their workers, but in the long run, if their workers are suffering mental health injuries, burnout makes it kind of sound like you're just tired or you work too much or you need a break. It's much more serious than that. These are mental health injuries that happen at work that can affect the rest of your life. And I think they have to be taken as seriously in workplaces as physical health and safety is. We've got very clear laws and regulations and insurance policies around physical dangers in the workplace. And I think we have to be thinking of mental health issues in the same way. Very clear evidence of the way that workplace factors can contribute to mental health injuries. Workload is a big one, and in particular where you have a contrast between high demands for output with a lack of control and agency and autonomy for workers to try and meet those goals. Those two together seem to be a very potent and dangerous mixture. Issues of insecurity clearly exacerbate mental health injuries in the workplace. The fact that you're working hard, but you don't know if you're still going to have a job next month, even, let alone next year, given the rise of insecure type jobs, temporary contracting, even gig work, of course. Finally, exposure to dangers like bullying or even violence in workplaces, very strongly correlated. And the costs are felt by the workers themselves, first and foremost, and their families, but also by employers through various channels. Absenteeism, obviously. Presenteeism, this is where people show up to work but can't actually do the job that they're capable of because of those mental health problems, as well as insurance compensation and other expenses like that. So even on a dollars and cents basis, let alone a kind of compassionate basis, I do think employers have to pay more attention to the dangers on mental health in modern workplaces, and to be systematic in eliminating and minimizing those dangers in the same way as they would go around a workplace and eliminate obvious physical threats to well-being. Think about workload and other mental health determinants in the same approach.
So that's a great point. Workplace bullying and harassment, a huge issue, has a huge impact on productivity in a dollars and cents way, and something that we've written about at the Globe and Mail. I am going to actually pivot to audience questions because I understand we have a very engaged audience, which is always fantastic, and I want to try to get as many of those questions answered as possible. So the first question, from the point of view of the future of careers, do you think that Canadian companies are prioritizing enough hiring and training of students, especially as the boomer generation retires? Karen, I'm going to ask you to take that one.
Yeah, so I love the question, and there's a couple of, so I agree with the sentiment of the question. And so in addition to looking at students, something that we're doing is we're looking at taking away some of the education industry time on job or location-based criteria for some job postings. So really opening up the aperture to level the playing field and hire people into the company, being focused on innovation, being focused on inclusion. We're also joined the World Economics Skills Link Alliance last year. And so this speaks to the question. It's a group of companies, educators, governments, partners working together to advance the WEF's reskilling revolution to equip 1 billion people with better jobs, education, and skills by 2030. And so a big believer in corporate educational partnerships to focus on how we create jobs for students coming out of school. And then as people enter the workforce, how we give them opportunities to keep those skills fresh. The shelf life of skills right now is so short. So we need to be continually giving our employees opportunities to increase their proficiency as the world evolves so quickly, especially as customer expectations change, as everything gets digitized. We know we need to help our people, whether they're entering the workforce or mid-career people, keep their skills fresh. And so that's something we're really focused on.
Okay, Paula, I kind of want you to weigh in on this one too. Are we doing enough to prioritize, hiring and training of students? Curious what you're seeing in terms of also the boomers retiring. Are they actually leaving the workforce in the same pace that we expected them would?
Actually, there's probably a higher risk of people retiring early, downshifting in a number of different ways. And we've seen that. We actually looked at older employees as well as we looked at senior leaders. And over the last little while, that's been part of this story of the Great Resignation, the amount of loss that we have in terms of experience and skill and will have, because some people are just contemplating and planning and will take their action soon. So with all of that happening, there's definitely needing to be, and I do think employers are taking very seriously the need to get in new talent and new skills, and Karen articulated a number of different ways, but I also think that we're thinking about it in broader ways as well. People reskilling mid-career, so not a traditional student coming, straight out of a post-secondary education, but people shifting and getting talent from other sources, micro-skilling. So as people are kind of leaving either post-secondary institution or high school or somewhere else in the organization, not necessarily putting the barrier, it could be a barrier of a more advanced degree or a significant amount of experience before getting into a role, but really looking at microskilling either through an institution or on the job, so people are up to speed and can move into areas of need more quickly. So I definitely think that organizations are looking at this, and wisely so, because I think it will be an issue of significance going forward as it is now.
Okay, Jim, a question for you, and this is related to the issue of burnout. Do you think that managers are speaking up enough about protecting the lunch hour so people can actually take a break? The lunch hour has really eroded during work from home. I'm really curious about your take on this.
Oh, that's a great question, Rita. And actually, it's not just, excuse me, at lunch that we see this kind of creeping takeover of our days by work. It's also early starts. It's obviously working through normal coffee breaks that you'd have, staying late, and then, feeling pressured that you have to check the email or the texts after hours as well. And with the work from home phenomena, that line between work and life, which was already blurry, is even harder to detect. So a lot of people, to show that they're dedicated and keep their job or get a promotion are stretching the boundaries of their workday. And to some extent, managers have to put limits on that, but also workers themselves, I think, have to recognize, wait a minute, we don't live to work. We work in order to live, to support ourselves and our families and have a good life. And we have to understand that we have a right to time off, including breaks during the day and a set end to the work day and weekends and holidays. And that creeping expansion of work and the demands of work into the other areas of our life, I think, is a big problem. Managers, employees, and governments, frankly, all have a role to play in saying, yeah, I know everybody feels insecure and wants to do the best job that they can, but in the long run, we have to have a better balance, and that means putting limits on the workday. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I've been trying my best to actually get up from my desk and eat lunch with my colleagues when I'm in the office. It's hard. I've been eating at my desk for so long. Okay, so I have a question for Mohammed now. Will remote work proliferate? And if so, what new challenges will that pose for businesses and across society as a whole?
Short answer, absolutely. I do think I want to kind of, again, so for context, we've been pursuing and actively building kind of a remote work culture for the last 10 plus years, and certainly resonate with all the challenges that I think Jim and Paula had called out, where things do tend to blur and bleed into each other. So there's definitely there should be, I should say, an intentional effort from all parties, I would argue, to make sure that there is a balance in place and there's a bit of a harmony. I think the old terminology used to say work-life balance, and that somehow implied a bordered time where something starts and something begins. I think we can all agree there is no start and end to work and life. I think they tend to be merged together. And I think a proper culture is one that promotes this, well-being we've been talking about within the context of work happening anywhere, from home to the office. Here's what I'd say, though. I think I want to the parenthesis or the circumstances of the pandemic are pandemic circumstances, right? So I don't think we should all confuse remote work with whatever we've all been living through for the last 2 years, right? So key call out, right? It's not as bad as what the last 2 years have been, because it's not really remote work, that's the pandemic. In that in mind, I do think most employers in our conversation with our customers have already started implementing strategies that are multi-year, longer-term focus on ensuring, back to my point, the employees, the worker, the talent are doing their best work regardless of the where and when, and doing so without the mental health challenges, to quote Jim, in the long run, right? So again, short answer, remote work is certainly going to continue, but it's just going to be called work. I do think there needs to be an intentional tweak and adjustment to the culture, to how performance is perceived, to how even work is perceived. The idea of showing up late in the office, I think that's a yesterday problem, but there's going to be new problems that we need to deal with. And I do think it's an effort of everybody collectively protecting each other's territory and making sure we look after each other in order to be successful.
Okay, yeah, you're right. I think we're going to have to start rethinking performance and the value we've traditionally put on FaceTime, because if we're going to have these remote work policies. Okay, I have an audience question. It's for Jim. And Jim, I want you to answer first, but Karen, I'd like you to kind of weigh in on this after, because your perspective would be really good here as well. Do you think that the gap between university graduate skills and employable skills is widening? Jim, you first.
Oh, that's a very thoughtful question. Thank you. Yes, it is, absolutely. And it's interesting that we continually hear concerns and complaints from employers about a skills shortage in Canada, and that they can't find the skilled workers that they need. Yet when you look at the data, Canadians have higher education measured by tertiary education participation than they ever have, and than any other industrial country. This is one of the OECD tables where Canada is at the top. The proportion of the core age workforce with tertiary education is higher than anywhere else in the world. So that, it's hard to jive those two things. Skills shortage, yet more education than ever. And it does, I think, indicate a few imbalances. One of them is, I think in Canada, we underestimate the value of vocational and college education, which are very practical and often very well-paying skills that are in higher demand. So when kids and their parents are thinking about what education to pursue, I do wish that we put more thought and potential emphasis on vocational and college training and skilled trades, and governments can do that as well through more resources and profile for the vocational system. Secondly, there's just an issue of a bit of a mismatch between this rhetoric about skills shortage and the nature of many of the jobs that are being created in our economy. The reality is the number of jobs in what I'd call low tech and generally low wage service occupations is growing. And you don't need a university education to do most of those jobs. So at the same time as we're encouraging Canadians to get more skills, and we should, we also have to be pushing the economy to create a higher quality of work so that people can use those skills when they finally do get a job that is in that field.
Okay, Karen, curious about your experience and your views on this sort of skills gap.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with a lot of what was said, and I do think the importance of education and higher education in terms of what that brings for people's education is fantastic. But what I do see is when people join the organization, I want to call it an opportunity for us to provide them with the skills they need to do their job. And as I said earlier, the shelf life of some skills, especially technical skills, is so short. So people can't come out of school and expect never to learn anything new and be gainfully employed, which is why many of my colleagues and many other organizations focus on lifelong learning. And so that may be things that you're learning on the job, that may be a course that your employer sends you on, that may be something that you learn on your own. The democratization of learning through the intranet, we can all learn so many things on the intranet to help us enrich ourselves and just speak to our curiosity. So I definitely think it's a shared partnership between the educational institutions in Canada and the US, as well as employers, as well as individuals seeking out ways to keep their skills fresh. So I think it's a combination of everybody's accountability.
Okay, Mohammed, a question for you. It's a bit of a follow-up to our previous discussion on remote work. And the question from the audience is, what are the skills most looked for by employers that might have risen out of working remotely during the pandemic?
That's a really good one. And I would argue, as I think I briefly mentioned, as we're looking ahead, again, I can appreciate we are in a bit of a transition period and we are adjusting ourselves, but everything Karen and Jim talks about are very much relevant in this conversation, regardless of where people work from. But let me put it in the context of digital transformation, which I do think kind of put a lot of accent and emphasis on all these things we're discussing around, are people having the right skills? Is the shelf life of their skill long enough for the value chain to continue or not? So there is certainly a shift, and I would say not only in the workplace, but also in our life, where we are short on a lot of things that now we can do on a fingertip in a second, right? So the notion of face-to-face for the sake of face-to-face, or office presence for the sake of office presence, I would even argue office dress policy has evolved. But beyond the anecdotal, I think, experience we all go through every day, I do believe the notion of self-entrepreneurship and being a little bit more self-driven, where things are not offered for you in an office environment, where you just have to walk into the office and then you're exposed to them, whether that's a diversity and inclusion initiative or a training initiative, as Karen mentioned. I think it is going to be from a very employee-centric perspective. I do think a differentiator will be for people to be much more forward with taking initiative, being more curious, trying to understand what is more relevant as a skill and learn it and master it and move on to the next one as a lifelong learner, as Karen mentioned. I would argue that is probably what's going to be slightly different. But eventually, I would look at this longer term in terms of the notion of staying relevant skill-wise in a world that is very much digitized is what I would definitely give as advice, and from a career standpoint.
Okay, Paula, this is an audience question for you, and it's about the responsibility that employers have for supporting the career management of their employees. And the question is, how do you see that shifting?
I think that, again, we're talking about it in the context of the pandemic, but I think what the pandemic has done is really just put a sharp bow along a lot of things that have been happening anyway. I think at the end of the day, in terms of career management, the straight lines are not as straight anymore. So you could have started in an organization and there could be a very, very clear career path at a certain point in time. But life is changing, business is changing, the career paths are changing, new opportunities are coming up. So from an employer's point of view, I think one of the things that's very important is to make sure that your managers are well equipped to help encourage people and help expose them to other opportunities. Everybody has different skills. After you've been in a job for a while, you tend to specialize in something that shows perhaps what your next step could be. And your best coach in what that next step is actually your manager, but your manager is not going to be able to do that unless they're well supported. The other is, I think organizations need to, as a matter of career progression, as a matter of investing in their people and their well-being and their growth, is be very transparent in terms of what is available and what skills are needed and what areas are emerging, because that is evolving over a long period of time and on an ongoing period of time. And also, ideally, offering some of that training and micro-skilling and ability for people to shift from one place to another. So I do think from my point of view, the best thing that an organization can do is to help people understand where their next step could be, and to help people feel comfortable in being flexible in what that next step is. Because if my plan 10 or 15 years ago was X, then Y, then Z, then by the time I get to X, who knows whether Y and Z is still there. And I still want to have a career. I still want to progress, and I still want to be able to understand how my employer can support me in that next step, even if it is more fluid than it was before.
Okay, unfortunately, we are going to have to leave our discussion there because we're almost out of time. There were so many other great questions that have come in from the audience, and I wish we could get more of them answered. Listen, I'd like to say thank you to Paula, Karen, Mohammed, and Jim for being here with us today. I would also like to thank everyone in the audience for being here, for tuning in, and for your absolutely great comments and questions. Again, my apologies that I didn't get to answer or get to ask more of them. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, a big thank you to BMO Bank of Montreal for making today's event possible. We will send out a link to the recorded webcast in about 2 weeks' time. So thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.